Hello, thank you so much for joining our Christmas tree farm chat lesson today. We are going to watch a farm chat video and learn all about Christmas trees and what it's like to run a Christmas tree farm. And then, if you have one of my classroom kits, you will have a little activity to do with pine cones.
Hi, I'm Corey Johnson. I'm co-owner of Wiki Up Hill Christmas Tree Farm. Um, I've been I worked here as a high school kid, but took it over in 2020. So we've been working at the farm for about 5 years now. We grow several different types of trees. We have pine trees, spruce trees, and fir trees. What you're looking at here is called a white pine. It's a really popular tree. It is a nice, soft needle, long needle tree. And this is a very, very popular one. They get very full and bushy. This is probably about a 9 to 10 foot tree here. If we come this way just a little ways, we have a variety of spruce trees. If you were here to touch this tree, it's sharp and it's pokey. It hurts. That's how you know it's a spruce tree. We've got about 5 different types of spruce trees here. Going back to the pine trees, we have 3 different types of pine trees: white pine, Scotch pine, and red pine. And then if we walk this way a little bit farther, we have the most popular tree on the farm, the one that people seem to like the most. It's called a Fraser fir. Fir trees are a shorter needle tree, and they're much softer than the spruce trees, so that's why a lot of people like them. But we have Fraser firs, we have balsam firs, we have canane firs, and we even have a concolor fir. And a concolor fir is a really unique tree. Kind of smells citrusy when you break the needles. That's a kind of a niche tree, but it's one that I really like. Okay, this tree right here, we just planted this year. So we always plant, we shoot for the first week of April, and we'll plant all of our trees in a couple weekends. So this is a little baby white pine, only been in the ground for a year. It will take between 7 to 10 years for a tree to get from this size here to this size here, which is about 6 foot. So every tree on the farm that's 6 foot, we will put one of these little tags on. We'll write the species of it. So this just says W pine for white pine, and then we'll put a price tag on it. And then there's a little spot here where we just mark the approximate height. So this one has a little etch next to about 6 foot. So anything that's 6 foot and bigger, we'll tag. And the people that want to come out here, they can use a saw from us, and they cut down their own tree. One of the main jobs during the summer is to make a tree actually look like a Christmas tree. These things do not grow. If you look at any pine tree just out as in somebody's yard, it doesn't have this nice cone shape. So what we do is every single year, when the needles get long enough, we take these shearing knives and little nippers, and we will shear, or we will cut all the way around this tree with this thing, all of the trees on the property that are about waist high and above. So we use the little nippers for the top. So we want to make sure that there's only one stem going all the way up to the top. This one, you can see there's a few more, but I'm guessing this tree's not going to come, or it won't be here next year. So it doesn't really matter. We want to keep the trees nice and full. But otherwise, we would probably want to cut this guy off right here too. So that's the only thing going up, because we want one trunk and one nice straight tree. All right, this is a great example of a red pine, another one that's got these really long needles, little sturdier branches, but this one doesn't seem to have a bottom, and if you look around, there's several of them like that. These trees have actually been rubbed on by deer. So deer will come and they'll try to rub the velvet off of their antlers, and they'll rub whatever tree they can find, and what it does is it kills all those branches. So instead of having a tree with a big old bare spot, what we do is we cut off the bottom of those things, and then we allow people to still buy these trees. Now this tree, if I'm looking at the tag, is about a 5 foot tree if you were to cut it from here and up. So if people want a 3 to 4 to 5 foot tree on our farm, we let them cut down trees like this instead of cutting down a tree that looks like this, because we want these to grow to at least 6 foot to make a good Christmas tree.
Next, we are going to talk about pine cones. We have a video that talks about what pine cones do and how they provide seedlings for the next generation of trees.
Ever wonder what a pine cone is? Pines are evergreen conifers and the oldest living trees on the planet. Up here is the best place to see pine cones and how pine trees reproduce. The cones on the lower branches are usually the male pine cones. They're small, less than 1 inch long, and are cylindrically shaped and covered with little scales, each containing 2 sacs filled with many pollen grains. The female cones usually grow higher up and start out small and green. They have overlapping spiral scales, each containing 2 seeds inside a tough outer covering. In spring or early summer, wind carries the pollen from the male cone to the female cone. The scales on the female pine cone open up. Once she receives the airborne pollen, her scales close up again. Within 1 year, fertilization will occur. During this time, the fertilized cone becomes woody and brown, and eventually, they fall to the ground. In some species, the cones may open up and release their seeds before falling. But in the case of our cones, they'll have to wait on the ground to be opened by rot, fire, or by animals looking for food. Once they open, their seeds will go on to become young pine trees. Well, I hope this was the explanation you were pining for. That's Making Science Make Sense, brought to you by Bayer.
I thought that was a good explanation for what pine cones are really there for. They're not specifically the seed for the tree, but they do hold the seed and the pollen to make a new tree. The primary function of a pine cone is to protect the tree's seeds. The cone's tough scales shield the developing seeds from harsh weather, predators, and fire. Pine cones have a fascinating mechanism for seed dispersal. When mature, the cone scales open up, allowing the winged seeds to be carried away by the wind to new locations. So that's exactly what we saw in the video, was that whenever the time is right, the pine cones will release the seeds. Some pine cones, such as those of the jack pine, are actually serotinous. This means that they require fire to open and release the seeds. This adaptation helps ensure the survival of the tree species in fire-prone environments. I think that's really cool that nature has figured out a way to ensure that our forests continue to grow by adapting pine cones to be safe during fires. Pine cones provide a valuable food source for many animals, including squirrels, birds, and rodents. They extract the animals extract the nutritious pine seeds from the cones. Pine cones can be used as environmental indicators. Their opening and closing behaviors can provide clues about changes in humidity and temperature, which can be useful for monitoring climate conditions. So, like I said, pine cones exhibit a unique property called hygroscopicity. That's a really hard word to say. This means they open and close their scales in response to changes in humidity. In dry conditions, the scales open to release the seeds, and in humid conditions, they close to protect the seeds from moisture damage. So we are going to actually do a little experiment with the moisture regulation and things like that that the pine cones respond to depending on what the moisture is in the air. So humidity is the measure of moisture in the air. On really humid, hot days in the summertime, there is a lot of moisture in our air and it feels really sticky. And on dry winter days when it's really chilly, or you can have dry spring, summer, fall days too, but dry winter days when it's really chilly and really dry, there's a lot of like static in your home and things like that. That is when it does not have a lot of humidity in the air. Those are low humidity days. Now we are going to do a little experiment with our pine cones. If you have one of my classroom kits, there should be pine cones in the kit to use for our experiment. We also need clear cups and some water. So if you want to go gather those things, now would be a good time. And this is just a super simple experiment. It's mostly watching to see what happens. But as we said earlier, the pine cones will change their shape depending on the humidity and moisture in the air. So what we are going to do is set our 2 pine cones next to each other and see how open or far apart each of the little pine cone openings are, the little cone openings are. They're pretty far apart right now because the pine cone is pretty dried out. We are going to leave one pine cone out of the water, and then you are going to put the other pine cone in your cup of water and sort of dunk it underneath and let it get all wet all around on all sides. And then you can let that sit for 10 or 15 minutes. Take the pine cone out, and then you will see the difference between the one that you had sitting outside of the water and the one that you have sitting inside. My results are up on the screen now. Does your pine cone look like this one? What changes are you seeing? I'm seeing a little bit of a different color change, and the pine cone is closing up a little bit, trying to protect those seeds inside. I actually don't think our pine cones have seeds in them, but the pine cone still wants to protect what's inside. On the screen here is what happened after I let the pine cone sit overnight. So I had taken this pine cone out of the water and just let it sit on a paper towel overnight, and look at how closed the pine cone got. It's trying to protect those seeds from too much moisture getting inside of them and rotting the seeds away. So the pine cone is closing up to help keep the water out of the pine cone. So after you get done with the 10 or 15 minutes, if you want to take your pine cones out and still keep them to the side, and then see in the morning if there were any other changes that happened. Thank you so much for joining me on this fun Christmas tree, conifer tree, pine cone chat. I hope that you learned something and have a little bit of a different appreciation for pine trees when you see them when you're out and about this winter.